Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Warlock's Lectures. I apologise for the absence without leave last week. I own several chimeras and one of them had become quite sick. I won't go into details, but it has involved staying up all night for the last few days and sleeping the day away. Not fun, but we are back and we should be okay to go, the general ennui of the current world notwithstanding. So in part 1 we determined that not only is every plane overlapping the others, all that separates the material here from nightmare here is a vibrational frequency that all of the plane reverberates at. That's why a plane shift spell needs a tuning fork. Remember, material components lend a clue to the nature of the spell, and sometimes also to the mechanisms of the aspect of the world it's affecting. The gods really are watching over you because, in one sense, they're all around you, playing at 102 FM while you're sitting at 92 FM. From there, we discussed that information can be transmitted from one plane to another. A psychic connection is far, far easier to send than sensory information like sight or sound. Magic is easier to send than matter. And so we considered the idea that magic could be used to find specific beings of vast and ancient power who fell, to gain an aspect of that power, just a tiny taste, but still powerful enough to change their being for a day or so, as they take control of that power, and in return let the vast fallen entity pretend it's alive again for another day. Since then, I've learned that there are stories of people contacting the vestige of Castus himself, and gaining a portion of his lessons in the fall, and of the layer networks of Faerun. In part 2 we discussed that the binding of one's soul and self to a vestige opened the door for a worse type of magic, one that admittedly led to a higher degree of power, but left their user permanently changed, their bloodline indelibly marked, and meant that your soul was lost. We had the first warlocks from their evolution of binding, though the link of dominion had long since faded, and merely left mortals that were infused with a demonic wellspring. We saw in the Fourth Age that demons tried again, but were stymied by the universal law of that time, that powers of sufficient mortal size were encouraged to leave in order to maintain balance. Heroes sought immortality and were granted it. That door closed in the Fifth Age, and so fiends were given the opportunity to collect on souls once more as they died, and we can only assume that they have. But we also learned that the material plane keeps a measure of whatever power is introduced to it. As powers come in, planes converge or spill over. First, their energy is usually made material in form. Time and time again we see ultimate evil or celestial good or elemental chaos that is introduced to the material plane suddenly turn into something of substance that emanates the original energy. There are many creatures that seek to break into the material plane for the sole reason that this will give them structure instead of the fleeting thought that they are. Yes, the material plane's ability to keep planar energy and turn it into a solid aspect of itself is a useful ability. But there are those in the multiverse that can do a lot with a plane's penchant for creating something out of mere thought. The following information comes from a previously uncharted world known as Travail, far off the main Spelljammer trade routes. Travail is a planet with two main continents of Turimnor-Cavion and Salution. The scholars of Salution have been making tentative contact with other worlds as they're currently experiencing an issue with something known as the Reoriginator Matrix. They've given some information on the world and the interactions of different forms of magic, some of which is quite extraordinary. For example, the planet itself is the convergence of the elemental planes, and is itself composed of a balance of all four elements turned into matter. All mortals have an elementality within them, known as an aspect, and that elemental aspect has superseded the more classical dichotomy of good and evil, such that there are good chromatic dragons and aberrations, evil metallic dragons and angels, at least as far as we would see them, but demons are still universally evil. I guess some things just never change. But when a demon is destroyed on this world, the spirit is sent back through the various vibrational barriers, and this manifests as a column of fire spiraling into the sky. When the demon is removed from the material plane, crystal fragments are left behind. They emanate a fraction of the slain demon's infernal energy. These crystals are known as fragments, and some inhabitants use them to gain a temporary power boost. You've heard right, using the remnants of slain demons as easily as one might use steroids or potions. All it takes is for someone to crush the fragment in their hand with the intent to use the powers within. The most common use for fragments is to regain spell power. As noted previously, it makes sense that a lot of the spells that we mortals have learned come from the careful dissection and augury of demonic bodies left behind. Many of the fragments left behind have the energy needed to power these spells. Non-casters can crush the fragment to be able to cast the store spell within, while casters are able to use them to restore the energy to cast spells of different tiers. As an example, if a Quasit were to be killed and a fragment left behind, that fragment could be used to replicate the Quasit's invisibility, though for a much shorter duration. Alternatively, a caster could crush it to restore a level 1 or level 2 spell slot. The more powerful the demon, the more powerful the spell that can be absorbed or replicated. The corruption of demons is legendary, however, and the mortal frame can't take a demonic empowerment without also suffering. Not to be outdone, the fragments can also be alchemically treated to convert the latent spell energy into, well, there's no better way to say this, to make them more demony. These are known as empowered fragments and can be recognized by the sigils carved into them as part of the treatment process. Empowered fragments provide a demonic aspect for a short amount of time that creates a positive effect but also a corruptive effect. The empowered boon is stronger than the normal fragment, but the corruption is more insidious, moving on from simple damage of the body to transmutational effects. If we could recreate these fragments in Faerun, should we? Aside from the potential hazards of using them, let's talk about the hazards to the environment. If you've been paying attention to the recent lectures of the mighty Gluestick, you may recall that the Abyss is a living entity composed of a single thought: to consume. It spreads throughout the multiverse like a cancer, with each point of contact within the infinite material plane creating a separate breach, a buffer between the material and the demonic. The Abyss spawns endlessly, demons being the swarming hands and eyes of that dread plane, corrupting everything that they touch, wanting to consume all, to corrupt all, change all, to make everything as in the Abyss. Though we may like to think otherwise, everything in the material plane fades away eventually. Oceans will dry up, mountains will crumble, mortals will die, and our greatest works of magic from mythals to the sphere of annihilation, everything will eventually be unmade. But not abyssal energy. It comes from a place where entropy no longer holds sway because entropy is the other side of the coin to order. Everything breaks down, yes, assuredly, but the totality of entropy is the complete cessation of all things dynamic. It is nothing, forever law, and the Abyss is eternal chaos. So if a fragment is used, the demonic energy enters the mortal host and stays there. From that point, one of two things happen depending on if the user keeps using fragments or if they stop in time. If they stop in time, the fragments stay within the mortal form until the host dies or passes them biologically. From there, they scatter into the world, heavily diluted but still active, always active. And if enough people use fragments, then their environmental accumulation can weaken the barriers between our world and the Abyss, allowing gates to open and the hordes to be released into our world. If they continue using, then those of you studying monster lore may remember that demons are fragmentary beings, and that chopping off the hand of a demon means that the hand retains a fraction of the power and consciousness and intent of the demon it came from. That hand might have been powerful enough that when it deconstitutes into Ichor, it could reform from the hand of a Balor, to a Nalfeshni, to a Quasit, or anything in between. Fragments are a measure of power and no less capable of intent. A fragment user who keeps using is inviting more and more demonic energy into themselves and could eventually reach a tipping point. Imagine the terror you'd feel if your consciousness and personality were ripped away all around you, as your body's bones snapped and reformed, skin searing and melting, bubbling, and your soul snuffed out as the fragments reformed into a new servant of the Abyss, using your material body as the fuel for her horrific transformation. No, I think we're better off without fragments. But then again, be on your guard against them. We've learned in these past few lectures that information is the easiest thing to transmit through the multiverse. I wouldn't be surprised if demons from our abyss hadn't already learned of this new avenue of corruption, and are already planning how best to pass this new material into our worlds. If you do see something that promises quick bursts of power with seemingly no price, it will probably, almost certainly, be too good to be true. Coming up next, due to a request I've received, we'll be discussing more of the 10th level spells that were available in previous ages, discussing possible ways that we could bypass Mystra's ban, and also, due to some comments from the previous lecture, discussing some of the warlocks of the 1st and 2nd age. Until then, to be continued.